back to Theology, where we drink tea and talk theology. I'm Zoe, and this is what I think will end up being the second installment of Dissertation Diaries, even though we're like into July now. But I haven't made a video in a little while, and part of that is because with Easter, things just got crazy busy, and then after that, I've just been like out of habit and all sorts. So haven't made a video for a hot minute, but wanted to get back into it and keep you guys updated on what's been going on. So I'm house sitting at the moment with my in-laws, and I'm just gonna take you in like a day of my life, sort of vlog of what I'm doing and what I'm studying and where I'm up to and that sort of thing. My uni courses haven't quite gone back yet, but in terms of like dissertation update, I have finished the draft for my first chapter, sent that off, got the feedback back for that. I've kind of skimmed it, but I need to go through and like thoroughly unpack it and like figure out how to implement it and just make the list of changes and that sort of thing that I need to make. I'm currently working on my second chapter draft. I've sort of got most of the pieces for that now, but need to order it and structure it and figure out how I want to communicate it, essentially. I've got to email my supervisors today with sort of update of like how I'm going this month, like how I went last month over June and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's sort of I'm up to. My dissertation topic overall is on the like sort of relationship between truth and justice as shown to us through the Bible, and then sort of what that means. So my first chapter is focused on what are the words used for truth and justice throughout the Old and New Testament, and what do they tell us about the nature of truth and justice in the Bible. My second chapter is really focused on the book of John and Jesus and his identity as truth and the judge, and what that means and how that works out. These ideas kind of piggyback off each other and that sort of thing, and so really just unpacking the book of John for that chapter and Jesus and those through those themes. And then my third chapter is going to be kind of like how do we respond to the call to live truthfully and do justice, and what does it mean to do that. So yeah, that's sort of the plan. Well, that's sort of what I'm doing. I've got some notes for my third chapter written down, but as I said, I'm quite in the throes of my second chapter at the moment, just like focusing on that and getting down into it. I've been really enjoying writing my dissertation. This is a lot of work, a lot of thinking and research and that sort of thing, but nothing that I didn't expect it to be, which is helpful. And so on my courses, my two courses that I'm taking this semester as well, because I have to take them throughout the year, one is on sort of like humanity and theology, and sort of like the theology of humanity and people and that sort of thing. And the other is on reconciliation and Christian ethics, which ties quite in nicely in with my third chapter, because I've got to pick a case study. Don't know what else I want to say. Yeah, we'll see how this goes. It's been a while since I sat and chatted and did things. So the things I need to do dissertation-wise for today, things I need to do today uni-wise and particularly dissertation-wise, is work on my dissertation. I kind of want to get as much of my second draft for that done as possible this week, and so I kind of want to finish fleshing out the main points that I want to make. Then also need to send the email update to my supervisor. Got to do that today. Have a reading for my course that I want to complete and just take the notes on and stuff, so I want to do that because the teaching day for that is on Monday, so the sooner I can get that done the better. And also want to go over the feedback email properly and in depth. So I might send the email at the end of the day to my supervisor after I've looked over the feedback. I'll probably look over the feedback this afternoon when I'm meeting with my friend in town. We're just going to do some study and stuff together, so I'll probably go over it then, because otherwise I will avoid just doing it if I don't set a time. So yeah, that's the plan. I'll take you with me. Hopefully that is less noisy. I've just got something simmering that I'm keeping an eye on. But I thought that I would take you through sort of my key things that I'm pulling out from the Gospel of John, and I'm trying to at the moment figure out how I want to structure it. So I've got these ideas, and there are definitely ones that like flow into each other more than the others, but I want to figure out the order in which I want to place things to ensure that there is good flow and ensure that my argument builds logically. So like there's a level where it kind of makes sense to go in chronological order of the book, but there are these huge themes that it introduced, some at the start of the book and some partway through, that I kind of want to, that are connected, that I have interconnected. So yeah, this is where I'm at, and this is there'll probably be things that will come up where I'll be like, I should really write a little bit more about that, or that sort of thing. But anyway, this is so a disclaimer, this is just what I have so far, and I'm not going to read you the whole thing, don't worry, but just sort of going over like this is what I'm talking about. So start off by talking about how like throughout John, throughout the Gospel, the author, who I'm just going to say John, but throughout the Gospel, John is essentially making a case for the Hebrew word emet to be incorporated into the Greek understanding of the word aletheia, both of which mean truth. However, the difference is that aletheia is a lot more connected to how we would talk about truth, being like true reality, or truth meaning like facts, and sort of like it's either true or it's not true, that sort of thing. And while there is an element of that in the Hebrew understanding of emet, there's also emet is frequently translated to mean faithfulness, and so there's this idea of truth and faithfulness being very linked, which I go over in my first chapter, and I'm picking up on that idea here, and I go through and explain how this is kind of linked, particularly through the idea of the glory of God, because it's drawing on Exodus 33-34. So I make this whole argument, which is not like it's not a debated thing in Johannine scholarship, but it is something that I think is important to make the case, given it is fundamental to it is important to just really outline in detail the case and my thinking of that, and then what I want to build upon in that, because the idea of truth is kind of fundamental to my dissertation. So that's sort of where I start with, and then from there I go to this idea. I draw in a little bit this idea that comes up more in one of the other ones, which is the idea of like goodness and wickedness and faithfulness and walking in truth. Ain't no cat, get out of there! There is a cat inspecting a cupboard I left open. I think I'll be fine. If it gets stuck, it gets stuck, whatever. I can get it out. Hey! Actually, no, I don't want to take the cat out. Kind of introduce that concept here, but it comes up more particularly when Jesus is talking about being the light of the world and himself as the light of the world. And I kind of discuss a little bit what he means by being full of truth and full of grace, and I'm trying to, in particular, ensure that I'm incorporating particularly how this relates to the idea of justice, because my focus of my dissertation is on that relationship. So I want to ensure that when I'm making the case for why this is truth, I'm also incorporating like, and here's how justice is related to that. Here's why justice is still relevant, but not overdoing it. And I'm doing the same thing when I'm talking about justice, but it comes up a lot more in this chapter the other way around, simply because truth is used so much throughout the gospel. And the idea of justice is a lot more related to judgment, which is not inherently like a good or bad thing, but it's more means I have to ensure that I have properly established what justice and judgment mean in their relationship to each other, and how understanding the way judgment is used can help us understand the relationship for justice. So that sort of kind of argument that I'm building throughout, and also that I address more in my first chapter when I'm looking more at the definitions of words and meanings and the way that they're used. But after talking about Jesus as full of grace and truth, which is the phrase used in 1 John, I talk about Jesus as the light of the world. This is like a consistent theme throughout the gospel, is light and darkness, and that juxtaposition, that sort of representing good and evil, and goodness being really, really strongly identified with doing living in truth, and the wicked being identified as people under condemnation, so under judgment, because they have rejected the light, and so they live in darkness and wickedness. And that idea of doing what is good is doing what is true, and this builds on the idea built in the Old Testament of doing what is good is doing what is just. So we have this idea of goodness being doing truth and doing justice. So those are both active things, which comes up more in my third chapter than being active things that we can do and that we're told to do. I also talk a bit here about God's glory and how it's linked that with like purity and goodness and truth, because truth casts out, because the light casts out darkness, the truth casts out lies, that sort of thing. And Satan, the powers of evil, very commonly referred to as lies, and father of lies, being like the root of things going wrong. So I should make sure I've got that in there actually. And I then talk about Jesus's specific identifications of I am the truth, the way, and the life. No one gets to the Father except through me, because he says like, this is what I am the truth, but there's an implicit judgment here of if you do not accept the truth, then you don't get through to the Father. So that is the only way, and what the Father offers, what we offer as the triune God, is eternal life. So that, and I talk about the sort of judge element, the implicit element of Jesus's role of judge in that, because he is truth. It is by him, he is the measure by which we are judged as well, and our knowledge of him, and so on and so forth. And then talk about his claim to judge, particularly in conversations about where he gets his authority from, which links quite nicely into a thing about how the truth will set us free. And so that being the way, the truth, and the life, and the truth sets us free are very linked key ideas that I should probably talk about more in my dissertation, but I haven't as much as I would like. So I've got to do that a little bit more probably, which will come. And this then all ties together with this idea of bearing witness. And this bearing witness is where I shift the conversation from being these thematic things. I should make sure I put my pasta in. I'm just gonna finish making my dinner. Where did we leave off? Bearing witness. So then I talk quite a bit about the idea of bearing witness and how that plays into the idea of court and judge and judicial systems and the enacting of justice, and also the point of a witness being truth, and to be a person who has been witness to what happened, the reality, so they can speak to the truth. This then links very nicely in when I start talking about conversations Jesus has with people, and I focus on like 3 very specific conversations that he has with people. And so one being John the Baptist. So I talk about John the Baptist. He's the one most commonly talked about, particularly in the beginning of the gospel, about bearing witness to Jesus. And so I talk about that. This is then embodied in a person as an idea. I then talk quite a bit about Nicodemus, and in Nicodemus, in the part talking about Nicodemus, I talk about 2 Old Testament stories and ideas that Nicodemus would have been familiar with, that Jesus draws on, being the story of the bronze snake in Numbers and the Son of Man figure in Daniel. And so I talk a bit about those and why they're linked together, and because those ideas that both end up being really strongly related to justice, and talk about that and how they're related to justice. The next part, Jesus also talks about in his conversation with Nicodemus about light and darkness, and that ties in with the whole light of the world thing that I discussed earlier. Jesus is the light of the world. This is a significant portion of where Jesus talks about it. So that story in and of itself is in the text kind of compared and contrasted with the story of the Samaritan woman at the well. And so I talk about Nicodemus, and then I talk about the Samaritan woman at the well, and talk about some of the differences and similarities, and Jesus's revelation of himself as the truth to each of them. The focus with Nicodemus is a little bit more on justice, particularly because of the Son of Man and bronze snake references, and a focus on the Samaritan woman is a little bit more truth oriented, because it is about the knowledge that Jesus possesses about her and what he chooses to do with that. So from that, I then talk about the healings, some of the healings, particularly the healing of the paralytic and the healing of the blind man, and also overall Jesus healing people as an act of justice, because it is restoring their relationship with the world, with their community, and in many cases restores their relationship with God, because they are blamed for sinning for their affliction. And in the case of the man born blind, he was born this way, yet people go, so was it you who sinned or your parents? And that, I can't imagine that not impacting your relationship with God. And so by Jesus as God, because he is coming in and into that situation, like, of course that would help restore your relationship with God. It might not like do all the work, but it would certainly help. So yeah, I talk about those. And then there's this whole thing about the controversies that they occur on the Sabbath, and the idea of the law and the Sabbath, and the point of the law being justice, but what it does is limit violence instead of restore people to fullness, because of the way that it has to be done through humanity. So we are limited in what we can do in that space in particular due to our fallen nature. That doesn't mean we can't do anything, but if you're making a blanket thing like the law, it's not always gonna be done and enacted perfectly by people, particularly the more legalistically that it is done, and that's the case of the Sabbath laws. And I talk in particular, and there's also the difference between the traditions around the laws and then the laws themselves. One of the things being broken more explicitly was the tradition around the laws instead of the law itself. It is debatable whether or not the Sabbath law was actually broken. In other Gospels, Jesus argues that he didn't break the Sabbath law at all. In this one, he is saying that he only does what he sees his Father doing. Did God break the Sabbath? That's your discussion. So, yeah, so his argument here is different to the other Gospels as to whether or not he broke the Sabbath. He doesn't deny that what he did was work in John's Gospel, which is just an interesting aside note. I then talk a little bit, and I probably want to do a little bit more about this, whether or not I will, or the place for it, or if I can figure out exactly what to say. I feel like there's something there, I've just got to ponder it. Talking about, so I have a part where I talk a bit about Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, and in particular, Lazarus's point of his resurrection and stuff, and the idea of restoration to fullness and life being a key part of biblical justice. Now, I haven't said a lot on that. I know that there's more, particularly in Jesus's, the way that he interacts with Mary and Martha. I love those passages. I feel like there's something there, but whether or not I can nuss it out or make my argument clear enough for it to be worth putting in is different. So I might end up not talking about them at all, which is sad because it is one of my favorite stories in the Bible, but that doesn't mean it's right for me to talk about it. And then I talk a lot about Pilate, because there is a lot there. Yeah, so I talk quite a bit about Pilate and Jesus and what Jesus says, and I need to flesh out the thoughts into like full paragraphs and sentences and all of that a little bit more here, but it is quite a lot because Pilate is judging Jesus but also asking him what is truth, and Jesus is also in that moment judging Pilate, and what Pilate is enacting is such a great injustice, but there is such justice that is done from it. But that justice is not done through Pilate, but instead in spite of his actions, and that, God for the good of those who believe in him, work all things together for his good. Despite the huge injustice that occurs through Pilate's hands and decision making, God works it together for this greater good of literally all of humanity. And it was an incredible act of injustice. It was a mistrial and all of that. I talk a little bit more about this in my discussion, which happens next, obviously. Well, not obviously, but it feels like the natural flow on point to talk about the crucifixion and the resurrection. So after Pilate, I talk about the crucifixion and resurrection, how inherently it's not a just act, but in many ways it was redeemed to be justice, because it is God being crucified and he is he is wholly just, and so therefore it has to become a just act, because God is purifying what he enacts with. While that is what takes place in the crucifixion, is the beginning of that. It's not cemented and we are unable to interact with it or engage with it really until the resurrection, when we see the people, that like full restoration that occurs between Jesus's life and body, and that sort of being a restoration there, and that being seen in the resurrection as a form of restoration to what we are meant to be, which is what the justice of God is all about, is a restoration to what we're meant to be, particularly in the way that Peter and Judas both respond to this act, is a further example of when we do something wrong, there we have the choice on whether we come into the light, walk in the truth, and see how God redeems what we did, or if we continue to stay in our wickedness, take matters into our own hands, and as Judas did, took his own life. So sort of about that a little bit. And then I've got this random little section at the end talking about the glory of God and its light and its purity, and how that then is through which he kind of casts judgment. I don't know. And it is that purity that means he is the perfect embodiment of truth. And that by it we see everything, so the present reality or present truth, and the future reality or future truth. So I kind of don't really know where to put that section. It kind of fits all over the place. I'll probably put it the first time it comes up and then it will be referred back to, but figuring out the order of ideas that I want to build upon, because they all are so interreferential. Like I feel like naturally it would make more sense to discuss the themes before the stories, because in the stories I want to talk about the themes, but particularly how they come out and the way Jesus interacts with people, because that is the way in which he fully reveals himself as the judge and the truth, is through his interactions with people. But these thematic ideas help us understand it, and how it's discussed in more than just terms of truth and justice, but in terms of light and darkness and glory, and how all of these ideas are kind of interconnected, because God is one interconnected being. And so we cannot isolate his identity of truth and judge from his identity, from any other part of him, from the life he gives, or from his glory, or from his triunity, any of that. So yeah, that's what I've got. It's like 6,000-ish words, and I know that it's not actually it's like vague paragraphs, but it's not formulated, it's not flowed, and there are things where it's definitely when I am writing it properly, it's going to be more. I've definitely got all of the key ideas that I need to get down before I move to my phase 2. So yeah, that's sort of where I'm at and hanging and vibing. So yeah, that's that.